This is the Anthropology podcast, hosted by me, Gabby LaPera. Every 2 weeks, I interview a biological anthropologist about what makes us, us. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Anthrobiology podcast. Joining me today, I'm so honored to have Dr. Clark Spencer Larsen at Ohio State. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for asking, Ben. Thanks for inviting me to participate in this.
I'm so excited to have you on. It's kind of a little surreal for me because you've been with me through my entire anthropology career. But we've never actually talked, but I've read so many of your papers and your book that I believe is titled Bioarchaeology.
Yeah.
That was foundational for me. So this is very exciting.
Where did you read it? I mean, in college?
Yeah, I read the original version in undergraduate. This was in 2010. And then I bought the 2015 version when it came out. I was actually out of grad school at that point, but I was like, I want to see what's new.
Yeah.
There's 100 new pages in the new book. It was totally worth it.
Yeah, so now it's become an old book, and so I'm going to do a new edition coming up.
That's the other thing that's so impressive to me is I downloaded your CV because I was like, I want to see everything he's done. Wow, you have done a lot of stuff. You are incredibly prolific. I'm so excited to be talking to you. Also, I had no idea you're from Beatrice.
Yeah.
I had no idea that you're from Nebraska.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I really like Nebraska.
Since I've lived a lot of different places since growing up there in Beatrice, and then went off to college and at Kansas State University, and I thought I had a really good experience growing up in this little town. It's not known for very much. Most people have never heard of the place. Its major person who's come out of there was Robert Taylor, who was a very famous actor in the 1940s and 50s. And on my paper route, when I was in high school, his mother was on the paper route. Yep.
So how did you get from Beatrice to biological anthropology? What in your life kind of pushed you into the field?
So I don't know if you've been when you've been to Beatrice, if you went to the Homestead National Monument, which is located 4 miles outside of town. So it's the national monument for the first homestead from 1863, right after the legislation was passed. And so my parents, when we first moved there, I think I was in 3rd grade, they took me to the museum. And in the museum, it's a small museum, there was lots of old stuff, artifacts and so forth. And I thought, that's the coolest stuff, for an 8-year-old to see. And my sisters, I have 4 of them, they were completely bored by the whole experience. Yeah, so I would say, old stuff. And so I just got fascinated with dinosaurs and old things and archaeology. And so by the time I went to college, I knew I wanted to be an anthropology major because a guy who also grew up in the area, who then was an anthropologist, we met, and he said, "Hey, if you want to start your, education and so forth, I think you should go to Kansas State University to work with Patricia O'Brien." And he said that I don't necessarily recommend University of Nebraska. No offense to anyone who's listening, but so I took his advice, and that opened up all kinds of doors for me in terms of Smithsonian undergraduate fellowship, spent summer there, and working with Doug Gubelacker, well-known biological anthropologist, excavating sites, and so it was a really good move.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that people can take from your story is that you can start, if you're really interested in anthropology, in your undergraduate, you can start looking for those internships. You can start doing that stuff now, and it'll really help you later on.
Yeah, there are many, many opportunities out there. You just have to connect with the right professor, faculty, to find out what these are. But now with Google and so forth, you can just start Googling things. When I was, growing up, that's way pre-Google. Maybe even pre-newspaper. But so it was it all had to come from word of mouth and chance meetings and so forth. But now with Google, you can make your own chance meetings and look up people and say, hey, I want to meet them. And
Yeah,
yeah,
like this. I emailed you and you emailed me back so fast.
yeah. Yeah, that's the thing about my work habits is that I want to get them moving along pretty quickly because I get a ton of email. And so rather than wait for all these to come in and then do it over a period of weeks, like some of my colleagues, I like to get it taken care of quickly.
Sorry, the reason I'm laughing is because there have been some people that I've either emailed or worked with in the past in anthropology that have uh slower, let's be polite, slower email habits.
Yeah.
Um no, but I wanted to ask you, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the kind of work that you're working on now. So you literally wrote the book on bioarchaeology, but I think the things that are most interesting in your book and are actually probably like most central to your research, so I guess that works out,
Sure.
is looking at health in and understanding health through like osteological remains,
Uh huh.
and then looking at not just health by itself, because you can't really look at health by itself, but the environmental like
Yeah.
surroundings of health. Can you talk a little bit about that? I'm sorry, that's a very open-ended
Yeah.
question.
No, that's a great question because it's really what I'm doing in my research is that health is all about the context of the person and the population. And so I recently edited and contributed to a what's called a special feature in Proceedings National Academy of Sciences, where I put in a proposal to have 8 anthropologists, biological anthropologists, lead research papers on aspects of the transition from foraging to farming and human health. And so that's really emphasized more and more how that context is so important. And for human health today, which I think in many ways is way worse than it was 10,000 years ago before farming. So a big part of this PNAS special feature where we talk about different aspects of health and the transition from foraging to farming shows that a whole number of developments have taken place with the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture and food production. Global population really explodes after that event. We're going from maybe 10 million people to now over 8 billion, and that's only in the last 10,000 years. And some listeners may think only 10,000 years. I mean, that's a long time, but not really because humans and human-like ancestors have been around for a good 7, 8 million years. Let's say 7 million years. And so, with the transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene, that is, end of the ice ages to current environments, that 10,000 years is a tiny, tiny little drop in terms of the whole human experience. And so, what happens virtually overnight in terms of that experience is all this stuff with regard to population growth, which is fueled by farming. It's fueled by access to domesticated plant carbohydrates like corn in Nebraska, wheat, barley, rice in Asia. And so the world becomes really quickly dependent on those plants. And unfortunately, they'll provide enough calories to survive and live, but they're not a very good food source in terms of essential amino acids or incomplete proteins. But what happens is that with sedentism and farming, population goes up. This farming transition results in this huge explosion in global and in population size. So as a result of this, I probably blabbing on here too much, but as a result of this, as we discuss in this PNS feature and what I've been talking about for years, is that people start living in these crowded communities. They set up permanent villages, towns, become cities. So people are living very close together, which sets up the conditions for spread of infectious disease and origins of new diseases. It's when organized warfare starts about 10,000 or less years ago, where population's increasing. And so people are becoming more and more crowded and communities need more resources. And so they're saying, this is the scenario I think works best. They have what we want, that territory, and we're coming after it. And so as a result of that, we have a lot of people dying from these conflicts in Europe, especially the special feature in Europe focuses on conflict and then transition from the Mesolithic, late pre-farming, to the Neolithic, which is farming, and just the outburst, not outburst, but sudden appearance of organized warfare and lots of dead people and from these kinds of conflicts. So that's only a couple of the problems, and the others I mentioned are these infectious diseases like tuberculosis, coronaviruses, leprosy, plague, all that stuff was post 12,000 years ago. So it's kind of a bleak picture in many ways, but here's the thing that's not so bleak is that humans adapt to it. They do things to mitigate it. I don't think of the big picture all that successfully, but the outcome of just this transition that happened quickly in terms of time and space. So it's now global. We all depend on these domesticated plants, depending on where we're living, other foods as well, but it's a very, very different kind of climate, very different world we live in compared to pre 10,000 years ago.
There's a couple things that I want to do. The first is I'm going to read the title of your like introductory feature to this PNAS special feature so people can look it up. It is freely available if anyone wants to find it, and I will link to it in the show notes. It is called The Past 12,000 Years of Behavior, Adaptation, Population, and Evolution Shaped Who We Are Today. So that way people can find it.
Yeah.
The other thing this is one of the things that I love so much about anthropology is that it really forces you to look at a lived experience outside your own. Because I think myself and a lot of people who are probably listening to this podcast, I've never really struggled with food security in my life. And like the access to like different kinds of foods that I have are vast.
Wow.
And that's not been true for the vast majority of human history. And even for a lot of humans today, to be honest.
Yeah, that's true. And so I'm sure there are issues prior to farming, but now with just the population size and those insecurities, it's a huge, huge issue.
Yeah. And it's one of those things too where you're like, oh, there's the agricultural revolution. And I think most people realize like with farming, we get like population centers for the first time. And I think a lot
Yeah.
of people think like, oh, population centers, that's great. People must have been healthy. So they're having more babies because they're healthy. And that's also not necessarily true.
That's really far from it. It's really about access to food, and if you've got food, that's the opportunity for reproduction. I mean, and so yeah, and it just is fueled this continuation of this population size globally.
I think one I read a few years ago, and I don't know if it's true because I can't remember where I read it, but one of the greatest contributors to increased lifespan in Western nations in the last century has been improved maternal and juvenile nutrition.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
By improving both of those things, it helps people like developmentally be stronger. And so as they get older, there's more resistance to disease.
Yeah.
Which is again just something it's also why people are so much taller now. They have more access to food.
Yeah. In developed context, that is true. But in non-developed areas of the world, yeah,
Yeah.
it's that those deficiencies and so forth that are fueling these crises.
So I think one of the questions that people would ask is how can you use bioarchaeology to understand foodways in the past and disease in the past?
Yeah. I think that we could use bioarchaeology. It's really to get at what we do in bioarchaeology. We look at human remains, and human remains, the skeleton is just a huge record of food, disease, and so forth. So bioarchaeologists can reconstruct to a certain extent, although pretty accurately often, what kinds of foods people are eating, what kinds of plants are eating. And that's all done with stable isotope analysis. It's precise in some ways it's not, but that combined with the archaeological record gives us a pretty good picture of what they're eating. So with bioarchaeology, however, we focus on the skeleton, but one thing that's important about bioarchaeology, as I mentioned, is it's contextualized. So we look at the records of that are drawn from archaeology in terms of plants that are consumed, types of lifestyle, population size, population density, and so forth. All that context is really important to weave in with what we study in the skeleton. Another record of diet, of course, is the oral health. And so people have lots of carbohydrates in their diet and no access to dental work or access to dentistry. That results in other issues as well. That's called with dental caries and tooth decay because the carbohydrates you consume, once those carbohydrates go in your mouth, the natural bacteria that's in your mouth, Streptococcus mutans, they love that stuff, and so as a byproduct, they produce these acids which eat away at the teeth. And so currently, the dental profession could not be in better shape in terms of people needing oral health care, which is, everybody basically. Prior to farming, you just don't see that record of tooth decay. It's very, very rare. What you do see occasionally is heavy tooth wear, but so what? They still got their teeth, they're still chewing food. So that's another really huge downside of that transition from foraging to farming.
I just spoke with Dr. Trent Trombley, who's at Augustana in South Dakota, and he studies a late medieval population and he specializes in oral pathology.
Uh-huh.
And like reading through his papers and like seeing the photos of these crazy abscesses and like the caries and like the calculus that's just like so built up.
Sure.
It's really incredible. And one of the things that he mentioned to me when we were talking a few days ago was that it's also important to remember that access to dental care today, even in America, is still not great. I grew up in Appalachia, and there's a lot of people there who do not have access to dental care, and it causes a lot of health problems beyond just like losing your teeth.
Sure. Sure. They're it's wrapped in with a lot of people think of teeth as being sort of separate from the body, but no, it's all one big unit that's interacting your immune system. Yeah, so it's that's why it's so critically important to have a dental care and good oral health. And it's just a matter of, and this is a cultural practice of brushing your teeth and oral hygiene, which has to be taught. And so it's part of our culture, part of the global culture, and some parts of the global culture that's not part of it. And the natural thing is just to eat this stuff, and eventually your teeth are going to fall out, and that's life. But it doesn't have to be that way. But that's part of culture.
It was interesting. I was talking to my dad the other day, and he grew up in kind of a more rural area of Spain. And when he was growing up, instead of toothbrushes, they used a native plant
Ah,
to like help clean their teeth and chew on it, and it would freshen their breath. He's like, toothbrushes are better, but honestly, that plant tasted pretty good.
yeah. Wow.
One thing I did want to bring up from your article, you wrote another article called The Bioarchaeology of Health Crisis, Infectious Disease in the Past.
Yeah.
I really liked this article. It's a 2018 article, but one of the things that you noted is that bioarchaeology can tell us a lot about health and human disease kind of from three different perspectives. One is an individual's experience, and I think that until someone works with a skeleton one-on-one, it's like hard to really, I think it's hard to overstate how impactful it is to hold the body of someone else in your hands and see what their life was like written on their bones.
Sure.
And then another thing that the bioarchaeology can tell us is kind of when you look at larger assemblages, like what was the group experience and like what are the results of disease? Like one of the examples you pointed out are mass burials. So like if there's a pandemic,
Yeah.
you get these mass burials. And then the other thing that I had not thought about at all was ancient DNA from pathogens, which is a really cool way to look at this.
So most of this you got out of the special feature or
I got
other
this,
well?
I got out of the bioarchaeology of health crisis.
Or, okay. Yeah, sure. Gotcha.
Yeah, but I loved that perspective of like, here are all the different ways that bioarchaeology can like really inform us about health in the past. Like here are all the different like avenues.
Yeah, that article I really dug deep into the different avenues, and it was fun to write. Been a while, but yeah,
Yeah, it's been a little bit. But I thought it did such a good job of summarizing like why bioarchaeology is such a good avenue, because I think that's the other thing is people maybe who aren't in anthropology, like they hear about bioarchaeology and they're like, what really what can studying the past, just bones, tell us about now?
Uh-huh.
You know, and I think that article helped answer a lot of that question.
Yeah, I think it does. In fact, in writing it, I've always thought about things that way, but pulling it together in this special feature really underscored how that is so important in terms of what's influencing today.
Yeah. It's interesting also reading your work from pre 2020 because like you did do quite a bit of thinking about pandemics, which
I did, yeah.
it feels it feels a little bit like talking to the oracle.
Yeah, I agree that I've been thinking about this stuff for a while, and so yeah, so the pandemic to me was it was it's shocking like everybody else, but it wasn't for me. There's also not a big surprise because when you look at the record of pandemics, like for example, Black Death, I just happen to have a piece of paper here with all those years of 1347 to 1351. Something like 75 to 125 million people died from that.
Which is what, like, that was like 40% of the population, right?
Yeah, and smallpox, Spanish flu, plague, more recently HIV/AIDS, the third plague, which is late 1880s, and COVID. I mean, that's millions and millions of people, and so it really underscored the fact that this is how pathogens work, and it should be no surprise that we'll see more pandemics or epidemics. It's just a matter of life, particularly with the size of population and density for most of the globe that we see.
Yeah, I learned a new word from your work, which was, I think it's pronounced syndemic.
Yes, uh-huh.
Can you talk a little bit about those, please?
Yeah, so syndemics are these large scale situations of lots of deaths and but combined with access to resources that we talked about in terms of diet and other resources, but especially quality nutrition. And so that's linked with the social context of a society, who's on the top, who's kind of in the middle, who's at the bottom, and who has access. And that's very socially and culturally organized in terms of how what the health is going to be like. So, in a nutshell, that's pretty much it. Combining the health issues. So, health is obviously what we see, but also the social context. And so, when you have these large areas of society where across large regions, then you've got this syndemic developing, but it's a combination of social and access and the outcome.
Um, I think that one of the things that reading your work has done for me is underscore the importance of availability to nutrition and medical and dental care,
Yeah,
because it's those are the things like if you treat stuff early, if you give people good food, if you make sure people have hygienic situations, it helps avoid
yeah, sure,
other really horrible things.
yeah.
Can I ask you some more lighthearted questions?
Oh, yeah. But just to add to that, though, is that but the cultural context, the social context is huge in all this, and that's taught and it's passed from generation to generation, neighbor to neighbor, community to community. It's part of this is what we are, you know. And some of you folks are not going to have anything, where some of us are going to have, we're okay. But that's life.
Yeah, I think this is another really cool thing that can happen if you choose to do it when you're doing biological anthropology, which is that you can end up working with historians and cultural anthropologists and archaeologists to really give you a much fuller picture of what's going on. I think it's cool that we're in a discipline where you get to talk to so many different people and learn so many different things.
Yeah, and that one of my favorite projects that I'm still involved in is this Çatalhöyük project in Turkey. And I don't know if you read any of that stuff, but a really good article. This was I was inducted to the National Academy of Sciences, and so the new inductees do an article for PNAS, And so I work at a site at Channelhoek, where we're looking at a kind of a microcosm of this whole all these developments. What happens when it goes from a community of a couple families early on 9,000 years ago and grows to a community of 3, 4, 5,000 people living in the same place over the next couple thousand years. And they're really interesting trends in terms of what happens with that population over time.
Yeah, that article is really worth reading. And then you also, if people go to your bio page on Ohio State, there's a video where you talk more about your work, which is actually pretty great. So if you want to, and there's also there's a few links in there that are really, really worthwhile looking at. I'll also link to that in the show notes.
Yeah.
Which listeners, by the way, I recently realized that the show notes don't work if you're looking at it on Apple Podcasts on your desktop. I don't know why. If you go to your phone, the links do work. Someone emailed me about that. Just FYI, I don't know why.
Okay.
I was gonna ask, do you have? I don't know how to ask this without sounding incredibly morbid, but do you have like a favorite disease?
Yeah, that you know what? That's a good question, and I've not really contemplated that. I would say that let's see, what would be a good disease? There's no good disease.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. Um, but the treponema diseases, which include syphilis and so forth, very visible record, leprosy, very visible record, and a few other infectious diseases as well. But they're in the sense that they're diagnosable, so we can understand what's causing the disease. We know the pathogen that does it. So they're favorite in the sense of the scientific knowledge we have, not because of the ooh and ah. And although
Yeah.
occasionally we do that when we see something really quite amazing, but 'cause leprosy was highly prevalent in Europe in the Middle Ages. So there are a couple of leprosy museums that I've been to, one in Copenhagen, showing what that looks like in a population. So there are infectious diseases that are diagnosable in the skeleton, and those are probably most interesting to me because we can get a handhold on what they are, where it's coming from. We have great historical records, for example, in Europe, Northern Europe, and Denmark on when events occurred and so forth. So I would say that leprosy is probably up at the top of the list.
Yes. Not to sound like ghoulish, but syphilis and leprosy. Um, so first of all, a lot of people who have syphilis and leprosy, they will die from them before the diseases actually start to modify the bones. But when they do start to modify the bones, they do it in very specific and often spectacular in the sense of just like unbelievable ways.
Yeah.
It's super interesting. There's this one skull that they pulled out of Jamestown of a man who had syphilis, and like the skull, like the pitting and the
Oh yeah.
modifications, it's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very characteristic pattern. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very, very interesting. And those aren't the only diseases, but they are, I will say they're very you can definitely see once they actually get into the bone, it's very, very clear what's going on. It's one of those things where you're like, yes, it's terrible, terrible, terrible to have the disease. So interesting to look at the remains.
It is because, and for me, it's about learning more about that population, that society, issues that they confronted, and some succumbed to, and others survived. And humans are just incredibly adaptive and survive. Part of it is the fact that we are culturally dependent. We depend on culture in many ways to as a part of that survival. So this is not a downside, but in some ways it is that the fact that we are so adaptable and we have culture, which is a big part of that adaptation. That explains in part too the continued growth in human population, and it's going to be interesting. We probably won't be around then, but where the peak is, I mean, how much how much can the world take? And so, one of the elements we looked at, as I mentioned, warfare and conflict. It's about one group saying that we want that, which sadly is still continuing to today, which we see in open warfare in lots of areas of the world. So that too is a challenge for the world to address, and so we'll see there as well.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad sometimes will ask me like what when you study the past, like what are things that we can use to take into the future? And I think we've talked a little bit about like access to healthcare, access to
Yeah,
food, but it's also access to other resources. And
sure.
it is a lot of there needs to be a lot more cooperation than perhaps currently exists.
Yeah, exactly.
I did want to just mention one other article that you wrote with your frequent collaborator, Dr. Fabian Crespo.
Uh-huh.
Yes, it's one of the. I speak Spanish fluently, so I always see names and I'm like, do I say it American or do I say it with a Spanish accent? Fabian
Yeah,
Crespo.
yeah, he's from Argentina, so that's
Yeah, and he seems really great. But you had an article about how epidemics end. I don't know where it went, but it was a great article and it was extremely interesting. And I strongly recommend people read that because we've all lived through COVID together
yeah,
and we're kind of seeing it's not necessarily the end of the epidemic, but like how and this is something that's happened literally hundreds of thousands of times to humans in the past. The surge of the disease and then like kind of it ending up endemic in the population and then like another possible surge of the disease in a new way. And one of the things that you note in that article, which again ties to everything we've been talking about, is the ecological and cultural facets
exactly. Yeah.
to that. And I strongly recommend if you get a chance to read that article, which I will also link to. People are going to have a lot of homework after this
Yeah,
episode.
great, great.
um okay, I do want to be respectful of your time. Is there anything that you want to talk about that we haven't gotten to talk about yet?
No, I don't think so. I think that the really key point is just the value of and importance of bioarchaeology, the study of the past. For most people who aren't familiar with anthropology, when you start talking about, archaeology of the past, their eyes pretty much glaze over oftentimes because after all, isn't what we're doing right now much more important and our future? That's probably secondary, but right now, and I think it's important to understand the context for who we are today globally. And it's an extensive story, but not a complicated one, I don't think. Some colleagues of mine might disagree, but it's really about access to resources and all the downstream from that importance to communities and populations. And what happens if you have plenty of access? What happens if you don't? If there are issues, and we make the case in a special feature, not everybody agrees with this, but as population expands, then the solution for some of the issues is warfare, and this is how we're going to get what you have, and we need it, we want it. We might not need it, but we definitely want it. So I think understanding too human conflict really important. I'm not an expert on it by any means, except tracking it early on and not guessing, but hypothesizing why it occurred and why people are killing each other. And I think at the root of it is that the one community thing or group saying that we need this and we're willing to do anything possible to get it. And we're yeah, that's survival. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And these are all things again that can be written in bone.
It is an amazing resource,
Yeah.
the skeleton, for understanding who we are today, who we are the past. Then there's a whole record of human evolution. And I mean, it's remarkable. But of course, you and I are biased, so we understand that. But what's one really neat thing, I'm a professor, so I teach students of different courses. One of them is regularly the introduction to biological anthropology honors a lot of smart kids. They're not kids or adults, and them learning about an area that they have never ever heard of, and so they take the course. They take it because it's a gen ed course for natural sciences, So that's why they're taking it, and probably no other reason. And so it's really great to watch some of them, a significant number, go, wow, this is really, really interesting. And so my student evaluations for that course in particular are relatively high. They're smart students who are taking the course. They're inquisitive and are exposed to something they would never ever be unless they were in college. And so I get comments from them in my annual evaluations about that. And I use my own textbook that I wrote, which, okay, I'm biased. I like it, but it's become a good source for these students here and elsewhere because I know the record pretty well in terms of what's taking place over human evolution.
Yeah. That's part of the reason that I do this show too, is because I have had people stumble onto the show who were not interested in anthropology. Lord knows how they found the show. If you're one of those people, feel free to email me and tell me. Um, but it's really cool to get like messages from people saying like, I had never heard of evolution, or not evolution. I'd never heard of like this very particular facet of anthropology, and it's so interesting. And I have like started reading all of these books or whatever. It's very, very gratifying. And science communication is really hard, mostly in that most of the people that you reach are people who are already interested in it.
Yeah.
So it's especially gratifying when you reach someone who like somehow found you completely by accident, whether that's they went to college and they're like, I have to take this gen ed, or they listened to this random podcast. Very gratifying.
Yeah, I'll have to listen to some of the others.
Please do. Let me know what you think.
Okay.
But wait, hold on. Before we end, I have to ask you my 3 questions before we end. So the first question is, if people want to learn more about your work, where is a good place for them to start?
I would say department website, and because of the videos, but also I have a wiki page, so there's a lot of stuff in there as well.
Yeah. And your Google Scholar page is also very complete if anyone wants to look stuff up there. Second question, what are you reading for work right now?
For work right now, ah, that's a very it's a ton of stuff actually. I don't know if you can see behind these stacks. That's mostly work. You see all those things in the front there?
Yeah.
The back is actually I edited a bioarchaeology book series with the University of Florida Press. So that's all. I just keep them there, the books I edit. But yeah, that's part of it. But the big thing that I'm working on right now is gearing up to do a third edition of bioarchaeology. So I'm reading a lot of things with regard to that. And the field, as we mentioned, is just huge now across the globe. And so the next edition I do is going to take a lot more work than this previous one. That was a lot of work because the first edition came out in I think in '97 maybe. It's a much smaller,
Yeah, it was 1997, and then the second edition was 2015.
and you can see the difference in size.
Yeah.
So that the book that came out first '97, I started using a textbook. In fact, I taught the first time I taught bioarchaeology was at Berkeley in that sabbatical, and so we ordered the book, but it hadn't come out yet. So I had the students read the page proofs. That was fun, but yeah, no, it's so that this new edition is going to it's going to be fun to do.
And then my third question is, what are you consuming for fun? So that can be a TV show, podcast, books. Some people say hiking. It's kind of cold in Ohio right now to hike, but
Yeah, I would say so. In the evenings, my spouse and I watch TV and stuff to unwind. But one of the most amazing television programs is one I might have mentioned to an email to you, Gunsmoke. Have you ever heard of that program?
yes.
Anyway, so it sounds really corny, but I may have mentioned this in my email to you. The acting is really incredible. The storyline is complex and deals with all kinds of human issues. So there's a lot of deaths, people die in gunfights, but aside from that, it's just so well done. So and other stuff we watch, but I come in here usually about 6:30, 7 in the morning, and go home. I try to go home like about 4 or so, but I never do. I usually get home by 5:36 and so forth. But that's part about being a professor and having too many commitments. But it's all good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today and for talking to my
Sure.
audience. And I hope you have a wonderful day.
Yeah, you too, and thanks for inviting me. I enjoyed it, and very nice to meet you and to hear more about Nebraska, my home state.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Anthropology Podcast. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me at gabby.lapera@anthropology.com. That's spelled GABY.LAPERA@anthropology.com. This show is produced by me. Music courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear at Sound of Picture.